Fortinten, Germany. Mr. Ronald Walkers, Secretary, Global Soil Partnership, Land and Water Officer, Food and Agricultural Organization. Dr. Peter Smith, Science Director, Scotland's Climate Change and Professor at the University of Aberdeen, UK. And dear all participants, welcome. My name is Nopmani Suwannang. Currently, I am serving as the chair of the Global Soil Lab Network, which is the network that established in 2017 under the FAO Global Soil Partnership Initiative. On behalf of the GOSOLAND, it's my privilege and pleasure to welcome you all in webinar on the recarbonization of the global soils, challenges, and the opportunities. The key objective of the today's webinar is to encourage the build-up of the soil organic carbon stocks and support the provision of the essential ecosystem service towards food security and food nutrition, climate change adaptation and mitigation, and sustainable development. The scientific discussion on this important topic has increased manifold on the eve of the World Science Day for Peace and Development, celebrated each year on 10th of November. It highlights the important role of the science in society and the need to engage the wider public in debate on emerging scientific issues. In this context, soils are fundamental for life, and ensuring food security for communities worldwide is essential for peace and sustainable development. Soils play a key role in the provision of ecosystem service. Any change in something as little as an atom of the carbon can have enormous impact on the planet because carbon influences the climate and the life of billions of microorganisms and living species. As part of a national process, a healthy soil stores much carbon than the sum of the carbon contained in the atmosphere and in the vegetation. It is estimated that the soil carbon sequestration potential is approximate 2.45 gigatons carbon per year, which represent much more than the yearly carbon dioxide emissions by the aviation sector in the atmosphere. Based on the soil organic matter stabilization mechanism, either the physical, chemical, biochemical, microbial, and ecological, soil carbon can remain stored in the soil for thousands of years. However, the world's cultivated soil have lost between 50 to 70% of their origin carbon stock, which has been released into the atmosphere in the form of the carbon dioxide, mainly due to the unsustainable management practices, resulting in land degradation and amplifying global warming. Land degradation lowers the soil's ability to maintain and store carbon, contributing to the global threats such as the climate change and costing trillions of dollars per year. The status of the World Soil Resource Report concludes that soil organic carbon loss is the second largest global threat to soil functions. Sustainable soil management supports the retention and the enhancement of the carbon stock in soils and thus climate change mitigation, while generating benefits for agriculture, food security, and nutrition, provision of ecosystem services, climate change adaptation, and advancing multiple sustainable development goals. Investing in the sustainable soil management constitutes a cost-effective and feasible climate change mitigation option, which at the same time enhance soil health and climate resilience. However, soil sustainability and climate change mitigation require the multidisciplinary research works, We must build knowledge across the discipline as a part of the innovation and the social transformation. We need to increase the investment in science, research, and also technologies, especially with a view to developing innovative ideas. Scaling up sustainable soil management practices based on the soil organic carbon sequestration. The potential of the soil organic carbon sequestration is large and feasible. As soil scientists, it is our responsibility to contributing greatly through innovation, and it is our duty to make it efficient management by providing the comparable and reliable data so that decision can be made more accurately with a small uncertainty. The Global Soil Laboratory Network, GOSOLAN, established in 2017 by the GSP FAO, and is ready to take the lead in this global challenge for building and strengthening the capacity of the lab in soil analysis and to respond to the need for the harmonizing soil analytical data to ensure that the evidence-based decision-making for sustainable soil management. The work of the GOSOLAN supports the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development and the mandate of the FAO on food security and nutrition. GOSOLAN provides great priority to soil carbon by making a survey on the routine practices of soil carbon analysis, endorse and publish 5 harmonized standard operation procedures for the measurement of soil total carbon by humus decombustion, organic carbon by walkway and back and urine, and inorganic carbon by the calcimetric and the thyrometric, and by testing the lab performance of around 100 labs worldwide on soil carbon analysis. In 2019, the results from the testing lab performance show the possibility for the comparable result between the regions around the world, but the variation of the result depends on the regions. Capacity building would be the best solution to improve the variability result, while the monitoring of the lab performance still needs to be continued to ensure the reliable result. Before I hand over to the other keynote speakers, I encourage you to explore the sharing experience from all great speakers, embrace open science knowledge on the recarbonization of global soils as a tool for making it more accessible and inclusive, and the output of our work more readily available for all. Let me remind you that good quality data are pivotal to make wise decisions. There is the need for the harmonizing, assessing, and monitoring soil data through initiatives like GOSOLAN. I thank you all for kind attention and look forward to a fruitful discussion ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. And now I request Professor Ratan Lal to give his keynote address.
Thank you. I'm trying to share the screen. Can you see the screen, please?
Not yet.
It says host disabled screen sharing.
Screen disabled. The administrator.
Please enable screen sharing.
You can try now.
It's enabled now.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, very good. You should be able to see the full screen, I hope now.
Yes.
Thank you. First of all, Professor Iqrar Khan, thank you so much. It's a great honor to be invited. I see my many good friends, especially Pete Smith. You'll be hearing from him, which would be probably much better presentation than you hear from me. But I will contribute something which related to Green Revolution, which was a very important. I still have a problem in advancing slides. Okay, maybe all right now. So the Green Revolution from 61 to 2019, the global population increased during that time by a factor of 2.5 from 3.1 billion to 7.8 billion now. The global cereal production increased, on the other hand, 3.3 times from 880 million ton to 2.9 billion ton. Therefore, the per capita cereal production increased 32%, 284 kilogram to 376 kilogram. And this was a remarkable progress, in a way, a miracle, which saved hundreds of millions of people from starvation. And Dr. Borlaug, Dr. Swaminathan, many other people were credited, and I salute them for their outstanding work to save the humanity. But the Green Revolution also happened because during that time, 1961 to 2019, the nitrogen fertilizer increased 9.2 times, phosphorus fertilizer 5 times, potassium fertilizer also 5 times. Pesticide use at that time was very minimal, now 2.5 million ton, and planned to be projected to be 3.5 million ton very soon. Irrigation increased 2.5 times from 140 million hectare to 350 million hectare. At the moment, 200 kilometer cube of water used for irrigation globally. So we had sacrificed the environment and achieved food security. So the question is how to reconcile the need for meeting the demands of humanity for food with the absolute necessity of restoring and improving the environment, especially the global warming. So from the global warming perspective, it's very important that agriculture becomes a part of the solution. Why? Because we cannot do without agriculture. So agriculture has to be an important part of the solution. And that brings me to the discussion on the short-term carbon cycle. I'm showing the statistics of the year 2018, which is the most recent available. Maybe Pete may have something more recent. Atmosphere with a global carbon stock of 880 gigaton, increased during that year by 5 gigaton. And this is because of the fossil fuel combustion, which was 10 gigaton in 2018. In addition to that, we had 1.5 gigaton carbon emitted through deforestation and land use change. Of course, the photosynthesis, always photosynthesizes 123 gigaton, of which half of it is respired immediately back to the atmosphere. The other half, 60 gigaton, goes into the soil. Soil has to 1 meter depth, both organic and inorganic carbon, about 2,300 gigaton. And that year, the land accounted for about 3.5 gigaton storage out of total 11.5 gigaton emitted. The soil erosion accelerated the transport of carbon with the runoff and sediments. Probably was responsible for another 1.1 gigaton of carbon, but 0.6 of that carbon transported by erosion was deposited into the ocean. So ocean obviously plays a very important part, and together with ocean, which absorbed 2.6 gigaton during 2018, the total natural sinks were 3.5 plus 2.6, about 6.1, which is about 55% of the total 11.5 gigaton emitted by the anthropogenic activity. So the question really is, how is it possible, or how to make it possible, that land-based sinks can be increased with human intervention and judicious management of natural resources. That's really the key point which we need to discuss. There are many possible options of mimicking the short-term global carbon cycle, such as CO2 fertilization of the ocean, which has its own disadvantage of acidification and the impact on biodiversity, adaptation of climate change, obviously through better agricultural practices, accelerate of silicate weathering. Olivine, for example, is thought about grinding and distributing in the tropical rainforest, and its weathering, which will be enhanced by uh, grinding process, making it to fine particle, really does not lead anything byproduct which is toxic. It's CO2 uh, and other formation of secondary carbonates. There are geoengineering techniques and managing soil, of course, and probably Pete and I will both focus on the soil part to some extent, especially the degraded soil. Globally, the soil degradation accounts for about 3.5 billion hectare, about 30%, one-third of the ice-free land, of which soil erosion is very large component, more than 1 billion hectare by water, another 0.6 billion hectare by wind, salinization, especially secondary salinization, which in South Asia, Pakistan, India is a very serious issue. We need to think how to improve, restore, manage those degraded soil. One part on soil degradation that I would like to emphasize very strongly, and that is, we always talk about peak oil, peak mineral, peak natural resources. We never talk about peak soil. Soils are in fact very precious but finite resource. They are unequally distributed geographically, and they are very fragile to harsh climate, which is changing rapidly, but also to land misuse and soil mismanagement. Therefore, we should really think very carefully how to protect, restore, and manage this precious and fragile soil resources very properly. In terms of the peak soil, the per capita arable land area for meeting the human demand under ideal condition is about 0.25 hectare. In many densely populated countries, especially in South and Southeast Asia, per capita arable land area is already less than 0.05 hectare. And that has kind of exacerbated, created increased problem of the land grab, which I won't go into the detail, but also leading to the civil unrest. And it has also unfortunately created the so-called soil refugees, people that land cannot support, and therefore they have displacement. 70 million people displaced for various reasons, including soil. Soil was not the only reason, and climate. But 70 million people in 2019 displaced, and as you know, which has a lot of political ramification. So the question of endangered soil, extinct soil, peak soil, something we don't talk about. We only talk about endangered panda and butterfly and bald eagle and other animals and plants, but never soil. Soil is a reality. Many soils are degraded to such an extent that they have lost their integrity. Topsoil is gone. Many times the bedrock is exposed. So we should really pay attention to that. That brings me to the question of agriculture. 40% of the Earth's terrestrial surface is already used for agriculture. 77% of agricultural land, which is about 5 billion hectare, of which 3.9 billion is allocated to raising animals. 70% of the global freshwater withdrawal, I indicated that total amount, is used for irrigation, including Pakistan. Flood irrigation that was developed probably 5,000-6,000 years ago, including in the Indus Valley, Mohenjo-daro, Harappa area, and of course in an arid, dry, hot climate, that is the serious loss of water resources. 30 to 35% of the greenhouse gas emissions directly and indirectly, total food production chain, are contributed by agriculture. And despite that, the recent estimate 2020 report of the FAO indicates 690 million people affected. That's 1 in 11 persons to be food insecure, and 2 to 3 in 7 are malnourished. Therefore, business as usual is obviously not a possibility, something that we should continue. The question then arises, how do you feed the world by 2050? I think, and many other people believe, that we produce enough food already, which is to feed the current population and probably more, probably as many as 10 billion people. Therefore, the priority should be reducing waste, 30 to 50%. 1 ton of food saved from wastage is a lot better than 1 additional ton produced. Food wastage should be a crime against nature. It is, in fact, nothing other than that. Increasing access to food by addressing poverty, inequality, civil strife, and political instability, rather than immediately thinking we need more land. These are the options that we should think. We must improve the distribution of the food. We must increase use of plant-based diet, pulses as a source of protein, and use as much as plant-based diet as possible. And we must each accept personal responsibility of not taking food and things for granted. Each one of us is a victim and a culprit. We are a culprit and victim both. And each one of us, if we make a very small improvement, multiplied by 7.8 billion, can make a huge difference. Therefore, the possibility of improving agronomic productivity from existing land, no new land, restoring degraded lands, increasing biological nitrogen fixation, protecting prime land against urbanization and brick making, especially in South Asia, and returning some agriculturally marginal land back to nature. That is the strategy. I completely disagree when there is a call, we may need another 250 or 500 million hectare land area. Absolutely not. This is the option we must take. And eco-intensification of the existing land. So the question is, what is the soil that requires to be managed? Soil is a living entity. When a soil is dead, it cannot produce the ecosystem services. A good soil should contain about 5 metric ton of live biomass, animal, microbes, earthworm, termites, centipedes, millipedes, etc. These living organisms require food. When the crop residue is completely taken away, unfortunately in South Asia and elsewhere, that is a normal thing to do, these organisms starve to death, and therefore the soil becomes completely sterile in many cases because these organisms are starved. And that brings me to the question, essentially what Charles Kellogg said, all life depends on soil. There can be no life without soil and no soil without life. And the important part to remember is that rhizosphere, the soil root interface at a nanoscale, is the only place in the universe known where the death is resurrected into life. So this life-giving capacity of the soil, because of its microbial and the other biodiversity, must be protected, must be restored, and must be improved. I think the crop residue, which is the food for these organisms, it's an important commodity to share back. And soil organic matter content is also the most important indicator of soil health. The question is, what is soil health in the current context? The current context where we have very serious global issue. From that perspective, soil health refers to soil's capacity as a dynamic and biologically active entity within natural and managed landscapes to sustain multiple ecosystem services such as net primary productivity, food and nutritional security, biodiversity, water purification, renewability, carbon sequestration, air quality and atmospheric chemistry, elemental cycling for both human and nature. Please do not forget nature. Humans are part of nature. We must make sure that we protect nature. And I think this is the part of the soil health which is very important. That will bring you to the question of soil carbon dynamics. When you convert a natural ecosystem to agricultural ecosystem over a certain period of time, because the input of the biomass carbon is now less into the soil, the carbon stock decreases. It may reach about 50% in about 50 years in a temperate climate, perhaps in 10 years in tropical climate, such as India, South Asia, Pakistan, Sub-Saharan Africa. In Nigeria, where I worked for almost 18, 20 years, I found this 50% decline reaching in less than 5 years. Primarily because of soil erosion, which was a very serious problem. If the erosion can be controlled by conservation agriculture, by leaving the crop residue on the soil surface, and at that time, if we adopt improved management practices, such as conservation agriculture, biochar, the negative emission technology, many of those agriculture, maybe Pete will talk about that, we can follow a sigmoid curve, reach another plateau within probably about 20-25 year period, no less than that, maybe a longer period. At that point, if we adopt better management practices still, it is possible to attain the original level of carbon. And in some cases, such as in soils with dry climate, such as those in Pakistan, or soils perhaps with low phosphorus or acidity, such as in South America, in the rainforest region and the Cerrado area, it is maybe possible under those rare circumstances that you can go exceed the original level. Otherwise, in most cases, no. And the carbon sink capacity is essentially where you are and where you were when the ecosystem was converted from natural to managed ecosystem. And if we did experiments and determine the slope of this line, delta y over delta x, we can calculate the rate of carbon sequestration. We can also evaluate the mean residence time of knowing the pool divided by flux. And this improvement in restoration or recarbonization of the soil, many practices, there is no one. We have 300,000 known soil series. We have many ecoregions, many climate, many biophysical and socioeconomic human dimension factor. So to assume that there's a one technology that works, it's rather being naive. But there are few technology which have shown promising option. They need to be fine-tuned under local condition. We have to work hard to adapt them rather than saying that they do not work. I think if conservation agriculture works, perhaps we can see how to make it work. Agroforestry, biochar, desertification control, afforestation, improved pasture management, water harvesting, drip sub-irrigation, improved farming system. There are a whole range of this. There's no one, absolutely not the one size fit all situation. But other important part is that each of these technology have their own carbon and water footprint. So you want an option which has a lower carbon and water footprint, but also conserves, increases, creates a positive soil ecosystem carbon budget, and therefore sequesters carbon. That brings me to the question of what should be the current green revolution compared to what happened during the Borlaug's era of 1960, which was short-statured improved variety, responsive to nitrogenous and other fertilizer, grown under irrigation condition, and we have environmental issues with that concept. So currently, therefore, we really should consider soil-based green revolution, something which is soil health improvement. It takes care of soil resilience, soil's capacity to continue producing forever. It should be ecosystem-based, the eco-efficiency of the resource used. It should be knowledge-based, science and management-driven, not simply dumping the chemical and irrigation water. We should have varieties which also produce more biomass, not necessarily short stature variety, but obviously varieties which can also respond to inputs. But root system biomass especially, we need more for many, many reasons. So there are many other issues that we must consider. And one is replacing whatever is removed. I want to make a quotation from Sir Albert Howard. Sir Albert Howard was based in Indore in central part of India. He was at that time president of the Indian Science Academy in 1920 to be exact, 100 years ago. And he made a statement in his presentation where he said, removing everything from land and leaving nothing is a banditry. And the most serious type of banditry because it hurts the thieves also. That's a very correct statement. We must replace whatever is removed. Soil is like a bank account. You can never take out of a bank account more than what you deposited. Soil is exactly the same way. You can never take out always more than what you replace. If you do not, soil rebels. And soil rebelling is something that's very serious, as we know from starvation, hunger, and political instability. We must respond wisely to what is changed, and we must predict what may happen from human and natural perturbations. Conservation agriculture, this by the way is my experiment in 1970, 50 years ago in Nigeria. Cowpeas here, Vigna, these are not soybean, these are cowpeas grown straight through unplowed soil with leaving the corn residue back on land, a system that worked on erosion control on up to 15% slope. Wherever the residue was taken away, we started this experiment in 1972 at IITA. This picture was taken in 1986, 14 years after. The only difference between the two plots, one in the front and one in the back, is the residue is removed every season. Even though this is improved variety and we put in the recommended fertilizers are not effective because the soil is dead. It's sterile. It's cement hard. There is no earthworm activity. And all you have to do is look 2 feet away and soil is full of earthworms, very fertile, very productive. This is climate resilient agriculture. This is negative emission technology. Return the residue, make sure the soil biota is fed. This is soil farming, not crop farming, not livestock farming. It's a farming of the soil. And I'll come back to a comment called farming of carbon in a moment. So soil biota is the bio-engine of the earth. Do not destroy it. Do not ignore it. And sometimes when we take it away, that affects, if you take it away everything, it affects soil health. Therefore, the equity residue for the soil and grains for people, especially in the context of South Asia, is very critical, absolutely critical. Soil organic carbon content has really become very low in many parts of the world. I repeated that experiment in Ohio. In 2012, I had a serious drought. No-till experiments were started on a watershed scale in Coshocton in 74 or 73. And in 2004, we started removing the crop residue on one plot. At that time, Josh Beniston, here graduate student of that time, 6 feet 8 inch tall. And you can see corn with and without residue. And that was the example of the so-called climate resilient soil or climate smart soil, whatever you call it. On the other hand, especially at this time of the year in South Asia, this is exactly what is happening. Burning the crop residue, very precious commodity, or taking it away for feeding it to the cattle. Consequently, soil is left to fend for itself. Rather than organic matter content of 3%, 3.5%, the organic matter content in soils of South Asia, Pakistan, India is less than 0.5%. Because of those practices, burning, taking away the residue, not replacing what is removed. This trend has to be reversed if the dumping of fertilizer and the dumping of irrigation and continuous plowing of compacted soil, if those problems are to be addressed. Put the carbon back. And that brings me to the concept of soil-centric farming. Rather than a slogan of NPK, we must be thinking about CNPK. C comes before NPK. If you have more C in the soil, crop residue, cover cropping, or whatever, the need for NPK of chemical fertilizer will progressively decrease. And the crop yield response with every 1 ton of carbon put into the depleted soil of corn, productivity will go up. Soybean, wheat, rice, all of those crops, they'll produce more. In fact, I think in developing countries, increasing carbon on those depleted soil will increase total crop production by another 30 to 50 million ton. If we can increase carbon in soil by 10 ton over perhaps 15, 20 years, multiply this kind of production by another 10. So you realize that is the way to improve production. So what should the farming look like in future? I would like to have plant with more deep root system, plants which have association of its roots with mycorrhiza, and plant which we can communicate through molecular based signals when they are under stress. Grasshopper or locust is attacking the plant, or virus, different signal that can be detected by remote sensing. So we can intervene in a targeted way prior to the damage being done to the productivity. We must keep the ground always covered, minimize the disturbance, mulch crop residue, cover crop in a growing season, off season, and at the same time integrate these crops with the trees and livestock, so that it becomes a very integrated system based on holistic approach. And if the soil organic matter content, which I said right now can be as low as 0.2% in many soils in Punjab and other drier part, if it can be improved, the soil becomes disease suppressive soil with high biodiversity. And that, of course, if we require supplemental water and nutrients, rather than flood irrigation and broadcasting the nitrogen fertilizer with efficiencies of hardly 20%, the nutrients supplied directly to plant roots at the right time would be absorbed mostly by plants, not leak out into the environment. The technical potential of carbon sequestration with this kind of thing is as much as 2.5 gigaton of carbon per year on all soils, such as those adopted under Cather per Mill program. And Dr. Pete Smith, me, and many other calculated in 2018 that soils of the world between now and 2100 have a technical potential of about 180 gigaton and another 150 in forest and vegetation. Together, the technical potential of trees and soil, all soils, degraded especially, 330 plus gigaton with a drawdown potential of atmospheric CO2 of 150 to 160 parts per million. That's a technical potential. Even if we can get half of this between now and 2100, we are done very well, because the side benefit, co-benefits are many. And at the same time, however, we must make sure that we find no carbon fuel sources. Therefore, we are not adding more into the atmosphere, but we can withdraw in land and soil-based sink. That brings me to the question of farming carbon, which means growing soil carbon as a farm commodity that can be traded, bought, and sold. And farming carbon, which can be traded, would create another income stream for farmers and reduce the rural poverty, which is a goal, sustainable goal number 1 of the United Nations SDGs. So I think this is something that we should very carefully consider. The question is how much the payment. I calculated that if you take the opportunity cost of the crop residue to put back on the land rather than taken away or burnt, the additional nutrients perhaps required, the total cost of carbon is $130 per ton. That comes to about 6-7 cents, US cents per pound, or $35 per ton of CO2, which is equivalent to about 25 euro, which European carbon market have current price. And if a farmer is sequestering half a ton per hectare, of carbon, which I think is realistic in some cases. That's $65, $26 per acre. If a farmer is sequestering 1/3 of a ton, that is $18 per acre. This is not a subsidy. This is not a charity. This is not a handout. It's not a donation. It is the cost of the services we are demanding farmers to provide to the global community. We, who are the culprits and also the victim, should be willing to pay the price to farmers to make sure that they achieve what we do. This payment is especially critical during the initial 3 to 5 year period, when the immediate improvement in soil health will not be shown. It takes 2, 3, 4, 5 year time period. During that period, if the resource poor farmers and other farmers as well are compensated justly, fairly, transparently, properly, according to the price schedule that I indicated, the adoption of improved technology would be very rapid and would be important part to look at that. Another reason I want to mention the improvement of soil health through recarbonization, because the health of soil, plants, animal, people, environment, and planet is one and indivisible. By the way, the health of soil, plant, animal, and people is one and indivisible was the title of the lecture of Sir Albert Howard in 1920 of the Indian Academy. I extend it by 2 steps further. In addition to socioeconomic factors, food security research must also address environmental and resource management issues. That's a very important part. Remember, we improve the food quality but ignore the environment. No, we must have both. Environmental, resource management, and restoration is very critical. That brings me to the question of rights of soil. Just as universal rights of human, rights of animals, rights of butterfly, rights of panda, there must also be rights of soil and rights of nature. And the essence of all life, soils have a rights to be protected, restored, thrive, and managed judicially. Simply because you have a letter from a patwari or kanugo, that does not mean you can scalp 1 meter of topsoil and use for brick making, or you can dump the chemicals and kill all the animals in the soil. That is something is very important to consider, rights of soil. That brings me to the last 2 slides of do's and don'ts of agriculture in a drier environment, such as Pakistan. First don't, in-field burning of crop residue, flood-based irrigation, removal of topsoil for brick making, broadcasting of fertilizer and water in the soil, plowing and puddling of soil, go for aerobic direct seeding rice, traditional fuel, cow dung, crop residue, etc. Uncontrolled grazing, where cattle roam everywhere. Storage of grain in the open under a plastic cover, and one rain destroys it all. Subsidies for flood irrigation and nitrogen fertilizer. These are kind of wrong types of subsidy. And using crop residue and not returning back to the land. Robbing land, banditry of the land. Stop it. What should be done? Adopting conservation agriculture and making sure that it is fine-tuned for local condition to make it work. Do not say it did not work, make it work. Recycling of crop residue and animal waste back to the land. That's a land's share. Do not take it away from land. Do not steal from land. Provide clean cooking fuel to the rural community so they do not have to burn residue and dung. Protect prime agricultural land against urbanization. I'm really concerned the rapidity with which the cities are expanding and taking the prime land under ceiling, built up structure. We must plant trees on hilly land. The lower Himalayas are completely denuded. Consequently, South Asia suffer from drought and flood. During monsoon time, there is tremendous flood, and during drought, there is no rain. Protect those hills to make sure the water works. Revise curricula at school level, primary schools, so the children know the value of soil and natural resources. Pay farmer for ecosystem services. They are the stewards of the land. They are the stakeholder. We must respect them and reward them. Respect the profession of agriculture. We must encourage religious organizations to preach land ethics and protection of soil and nature. We must increase dialogue between general public, scientists, and policymakers. And we must involve communities and panchayats in soil restoration. The last slide, Professor Iqrar Khan, I would like to say that famines are man-made tragedies. I really think so. 3 billion tons of grains produced and 1 billion tons reach no stomach, human or animal. It's a tragedy created by humanity. And this tragedy can be prevented by humanity. We must make famine and mass starvation politically intolerable, morally toxic, ethically unthinkable, and humanly unacceptable. And for all that, maintaining soil health is the most important step. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you.
What a player, Professor Saab. We are extremely delighted. You have made our day, and you have put everything together so nicely. You have done the justice to World Science Day and also to your lifelong achievements in advocating soil organic matter in terms of soils giving ecosystem services and the soil ownership. Soil farming instead of cattle and crop farming, and so on. Eloquence. Extremely grateful, sir. Maybe we can spend 10 minutes for discussion. I would first like to ask the panelists to say a few words about the thoughts of Professor Ratan Lal, which we have just enjoyed hearing. So first, Peter Smith.
Yes, so thank you, Ratan. That was a fantastic presentation, and I really don't need to give mine anymore now. I think you've covered all of the aspects really, really well. I think you covered not just the role of soils in sort of climate change and for the mitigation potential, but you also covered their vital roles in underpinning our future for challenging food security and delivering all the other ecosystem services that they do. So thank you very much. That was fantastic. I have nothing to add. I'm just full of admiration for your work.
Thank you, Pete.
Okay, so we go to Göttingen. Yakov.
Dear Professor, can you hear me well?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Very good. Dear Professor Lal, dear Ratan, I always enjoy your talks on many conferences, and what I'm always wondering, you're looking always for some new things, how to save the soils and things, and you providing some measures how to do it. You are not only suggesting just general it is important and so on, you are suggesting specific things which are possible to realize and to make real calculation what is possible and what could be consequences. And this I'm always enjoying. Thank you very much.
Ma'am Nopomani.
I think you're muted, ma'am.
Unmute yourself.
Okay. So I think that the speed of the Professor Ratan Rao is very interesting because it's cover all of the topic that is very hot issue in the world now. And the ecosystem service is also very important, also the climate change. So I'm very appreciative I always very nice to have chance to listen to your talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Professor Ratan Lal, there is at least one question which maybe you can reinforce. You have already given your thoughts. Someone is asking, what is the most preferred method of developing soil carbon inventories?
Thank you. That's a good question. I think Pete will also probably go into this. What we have to do is identify what are the losses of carbon for a given site, region. Losses are mostly due to erosion, decomposition, and leaching. Some of the decomposition is, of course, necessary because soil organisms have to survive and it's their respiration, but erosion, leaching, those certainly. And then we must add input of biomass carbon more than the losses. Many times you hear the statement, we never get any increase, and you never get any increase for one of the reasons that what we add is less than what we are losing. So add biomass carbon. Then the biomass fertilizers are also needed. The crop residue CN ratio, maybe 100, 120, depending on what kind of residue. Humus has a CN ratio of 10 to 15. CP ratio maybe 1 to 50, which is very wide in the. So we have to also make sure that we link with rotation, complex farming system, so the nutrient recycling along with carbon added is included. So I think the examples I listed were there, conservation agriculture, which means leaving the crop residue back on the land as much as possible. Number 2, following complex rotation. Number 3, using integrated nutrient management. Number 4, conserving soil and water. Number 5, integrating crops with trees and livestock, afforestation. I think those are common practices, very well known, but translating the knowledge into political action is what is required. And one of the policy would be compensating farmer for generating ecosystem services. I indicate the cost depending on the rate of carbon sequestration, which many times said we do not know how to measure, but I think that's not entirely true. We certainly need more better technology, but we also know enough that we can use whatever we know. And on the basis of the experiments being done in the vicinity at University of Agriculture in Faisalabad or elsewhere, where the rates have been monitored, it is possible to use those in similar soil. So I think the technical know-how exists. Of course, it needs to be improved, which always will be the case. But using that through policy, by empowering farmers, by being pro-farmers, and by rewarding farmers for what we expect them to do is really the best way that we can recarbonate the soil and the biosphere.
Thank you, sir. That's very elaborate. We also have with us Ronald Vargas. Over to you, sir. Ronald Vargas. Your comments.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity. Well, all has been said already. I mean, listening to Professor Lal is inspiring, not only because of his inspirational approach, but because he makes something very important that we sometimes miss in soil science, integrating soils as a cross-cutting resource along all the issues that we are currently facing. And that's what he easily demonstrated in his presentation. And for us, that's very important. And of course, that's how you can understand why he got the prizes, right? So we all respect and admire all his encouragement. And the only thing I can say is that we are trying to, let's say, bring many of his advices and new ideas into action, because that's what we need to do, to move into action, because we have a very good opportunity now and we need to take it. Otherwise, we will be talking about the same issues in the near future. So I just congratulate Professor Lal, and I hope all the participants paid a lot of attention, because he really make a very good, important point on how soils can help us all, not because we love soils, but because soils can really do it.
Oh, Ronald, I thank you for your comments. I must say a couple of things. One, the prize is really recognition of the importance of soil and farmers of the world. I must say that. And FAO, you, Eduardo, and your predecessor, Rudy Dudal, Wim Sombrook, and many others have really done a remarkable job. And I think it was at one meeting, Ronald, when Pete Smith was invited as a speaker, And he made a statement, and I'm repeating, Pete, soil science community must seize the moment now, because policymakers, whether it's a Caterpillar mail, whether it's a AAA from Africa, from Marrakesh, or from Plaka from Latin America, politicians around the world, they're a very good example of looking for us to provide them the information to translate our science into action. And I think this is where we should really support them. And FAO can make a big difference because you got presence and visibility everywhere in the world. While I have a floor, I do want to mention I've been very privileged, very fortunate um, to get support from friends from around the world and colleagues. That's why I got the award. Um, Many awards last 3 4 years 2 years. I have given all the, I think about $800,000 back to research and teaching in soil science at Ohio State, and hopefully at other places as well. And I'm hoping that this will convey a message that soil is important. And that is what that award is for. Recognition soil is important, and recognition of the fact that the farmers are important. And that's momentum we should continue. I come from a farming family, small farming family, and I think it's a recognition of 500, 700 million small farmers around the world that they are important. And that's what the award is. And this award is to them. I simply accept it on their behalf. Thank you.
Wow, what a gesture. Thank you very much, sir. We are honored. Your presence is extreme pleasure for us. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, since Professor Lal has made a very moving statement, we are, praying for his health and prosperity, and we would like to see him continue contributing the way he is. And hopefully, many of us will learn lessons from his lifelong achievements.
Thank
you, and we'll celebrate your presence here, sir, with more talk for another hour or so. So now I request Professor Yakov from Göttingen. He will talk about inorganic carbon. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Can you hear me well? Okay, thank you very much. And I am very thankful also for this kind invitation to make a presentation on this recarbonization of our world. And I would like to raise today another topic, which is very frequently completely disregarded in many studies, and this is about inorganic carbon in soil. I already uploaded the slides and some additional information under this address below, so you are very welcome to download the slides and also some additional information about this inorganic carbon. So, the most people, when we are speaking about soil carbon, have in mind soil organic carbon. And surely this is extremely important part of soil and having a lot of functions. And if we are looking on the stocks of this organic carbon in soil, they are until 2-meter depths, about 2,400 petagram carbon. The most of this organic carbon is allocated in the northern regions, which are comparatively cold and which are comparatively wet. However, and all this carbon, all this organic carbon originated from plants initially. But if you look on this map, we can clearly recognize that there are a lot of places in the world which are yellow on these maps. These yellow places correspond very well to the arid and semi-arid areas, and surely Pakistan is also located in such climatic conditions. And actually, all these areas, all these soils contain inorganic carbon. If you look on this map of arid and semi-arid areas and compare with the next slide on which I am presenting soil inorganic carbon, this corresponds very well to the locations of the semi-arid and arid areas. If you look on the stocks of the soil inorganic carbon, in the top soil, these stocks are much lower than of organic carbon. In the 100 centimeters, they are already more, but in 2-meter depths, the content of organic carbon, stocks of organic carbon, is similar to inorganic carbon. They are very similar. But we should have in mind the whole inorganic carbon in soils actually originated from parent materials. And let us look a little bit what is ongoing as this parent material. And surely this topic, I think, is especially important, for example, for Pakistan, because if you look on the color of this map, this is one of the highest inorganic carbon content in the soil. What is ongoing on as natural processes with soil inorganic carbon? When plants are growing and respiring by roots and microorganisms CO2 and water is coming, calcium carbonate and soil inorganic carbon is mostly calcium carbonate, will be dissolved as calcium ions and hydrocarbonates ions. If the water decrease or CO2 content in soil decrease, then this equation will be shifted to the left. If CO2 concentration and water soil moisture increase, this will be shifted to the right. And actually, because many plants release in the rhizosphere hydrogen, the part of this calcium carbonate will be acidified and neutralized, and then CO2 will go into the atmosphere. This process is a natural process which takes very, very long time, but when we use nitrogen fertilizers, especially urea or ammonia fertilizers, they will be nitrificated, it means converted to nitrate, then a lot of additional H+ will be produced. You can recognize this in the rhizosphere of, for example, lupin, nitrogen-fixing plant, legume. And according to the scale, you can recognize that close to the root, the pH is about 2 units lower than pH far from the roots. 2 units means 100 times more concentration of H+ ions. And if we use fertilizers, this will get very intensive process, and consequently, because this acidification, CO2 from calcium carbonate will be lost. What is ongoing on natural conditions? When such soils containing a lot of carbonates, for example, simple rego soil, will be developed over longer time, then from here, part of the carbonates will be removed a little bit deeper and will be accumulated again in the subsoil, in deeper part of the soil, and such pedogenic carbonates will be formed. I presented this on such a small shapes, like a typical example for a Chernozem or molly soil, but there are very many interesting forms of pedogenic carbonates, their properties, and the formation mechanisms and rates are also very interesting. A few years ago, we summarized in a review pedogenic carbonates, form and formation processes which can be formed around the roots, in the pores, in the cracks in the pores can be formed by earthworms like such materials, or around the stones and especially on the bottom part, or such beautiful pedogenic carbonates you can find in the soil under natural conditions. But what is ongoing if we use fertilizers? Then actually a lot of H+, so acidification, will be produced. On the right side, natural processes are presented. Biological nitrogen fixation, respiration of the CO2 by roots and microorganisms, release of organic acids. All of them contribute to the release of ammonia, which will be converted to nitrate, and some H+ will be produced. However, if we look on the left part of this picture, when the people use ammonium fertilizers and additionally atmospheric nitrogen deposition is coming, partly acid rains, then huge additional input of ammonia is coming, and this ammonia also will be converted to nitrate, and as I mentioned below, about huge amount of H+ will be produced, and then acidification is coming. How we can estimate how much calcium carbonate will be lost as CO2 because of the production of these protons of this acidification? We used nitrogen fertilization map of the whole world, and you see nitrogen fertilization is varying very strongly, and we overlaid this nitrogen fertilization with calcium carbonate content in soil, and then calculated the CO2 efflux from nitrogen-induced acidification, and come to the amount that every year about 7.5 petagram carbon will be released as CO2 from calcium carbonate containing soil. Is it a lot or not a lot? Important is that this is a unidirectional carbon flux, because if calcium carbonate will be acidified, CO2 is going into the atmosphere and calcium ion will be leached into the deeper horizon. It means these carbon losses are irrecoverable carbon losses. It means this carbon we cannot bring back into the soils. And this is a huge contrast compared to the organic carbon. If we remove carbon, organic carbon, if it will be mineralized or lost by erosion, we have still some options by addition of organic fertilizers, straw, or other plant residues to recover organic carbon in soils. But inorganic carbon we cannot recover because calcium will be lost from the soils and there are no other options. We have tried to estimate the amounts of CO2 which were lost, and this is presented in blue, between 1960 and 1970. In yellow, it is presented between 1970 and 2000. In red, between 2000 and 2020. And with this black circle is presented forecast for the next 30 years until 2050. All these losses of calcium, of CO2 from calcium carbonate are connected with acidification by nitrogen fertilization. You see here close to each continent, not only such bubble graph, but also such bar graph, which present losses by liming. Because in the most countries, to avoid acidification of the neutral soils or slightly acidic soils, people use lime. This lime will be very fast converted to the CO2, calcium will be leached, and this strongly contribute to additional losses of CO2 from inorganic carbon. What it means? Losses of inorganic carbon, losses of calcium carbon. Calcium carbonate in soil have a lot very important functions. They have direct effects on soil properties and fertilities, and also indirect effects. They have effect on physical properties and soil structure, on chemical properties, on microbiological properties, and surely properties for plant nutrition and productivity. If you look especially on physical and chemical properties, we can see that aggregates of soil structure will be destroyed if calcium carbonate will be lost. It means stability of the aggregates will decrease, and also buffering capacity for the additional acidification will be lost, and it has also close connection to organic matter stabilization in soil. And because of these functions, direct and also many indirect effects of calcium carbonate, if calcium carbonate will be depleted in the topsoil or calcium carbonate will be completely lost, it's coming to soil degradation. Soil degradation, as also Professor Lal mentioned before, has many different situations how it works. One of them, what we can recognize, for example, here, that soil will be very strongly eroded because soil structure will be degraded and soil will be getting more dense. And this is one of the functions for which calcium carbonate played an important role. It means if this topsoil will be lost, for example, or 30 centimeters, then actually inorganic carbon in soil will get even more than organic carbon. So the stocks of inorganic carbon will be higher than the organic carbon. And please have in mind, 30 centimeter topsoil is not so much. If we assume that actually the most countries are losing at least 1 millimeter of soil per year, and some of the countries lose up to 3 or 5 millimeter, then it's necessary just 30 or 50 years, then all topsoil will be lost. And then again, our organic carbon will be lost very strongly, and then importance of inorganic carbon increase even strongly. I would like to come to the conclusion of the short talk. I would like to raise the importance of inorganic carbon, which is especially important in semi-arid and arid area. This is even the stocks are even higher than of organic carbon. Globally, soil acidification is ongoing, and therefore soil inorganic carbon losses are getting more important. These soil inorganic carbon losses are boosted by nitrogen fertilization, especially by over-fertilization, if nitrogen of fertilizers will be not completely used by the plants. Nitrogen fertilization raises very strong acidification, then calcium carbonate neutralizes this acidification, but then CO2 will be lost and calcium will be reached. Therefore, and now this CO2 efflux from the inorganic carbon takes about 7.5 petagram carbon per year. What important is, these are irrecoverable losses. We cannot put this inorganic carbon back into the soil, and very probably these losses will increase in future. Therefore, we should be extremely careful with the nitrogen fertilization. It should be scientific based fertilization because of other case, this calcium carbonate from soil will be dissolved and lost completely. And again, these are irrecoverable carbon losses, which leads to a lot of losses of calcium carbonate functions and soil degradation. One of them, and probably one of the most important of them, is also soil erosion. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Another side of the picture. Now I request Ronald Vargas, Secretary Global Soil Partnership, for his presentation.
Thank you very much again for the opportunity. I will share my presentation now.
Okay, it's visible.
Okay, thank you. So I will speak about REC soil, which is the recarbonization of global agricultural soils. I don't need to convince you already because the previous speakers demonstrated that healthy soils can help us in providing most of the terrestrial ecosystem services, and that's why they are very important to achieve sustainable development and especially human well-being. However, we have many global challenges that, well, you know, I come from FAO, which is the UN, and that's why I try to bring this perspective that we have conventions addressing challenges like the certification, drought, and land degradation. We also have another one that is trying to see the protection, conservation, and restoration of biodiversity. Then we have the one regarding climate change for mitigation and adaptation. And in FAO, we deal with food security and nutrition. But what is common for all these challenges is that soils can offer us an opportunity, and that has been already documented by Professor Lal. And clearly, we know that soils are the main terrestrial carbon stock. So that's a very important point to make. And in the other side is that when we don't manage soils sustainably, we degrade them, and that causes emissions. So that these are the two sides of the coin that we need to take into account. And something very important, we are constantly talking about CO2. However, we don't include much nitrous oxide into this equation, and that's fundamental because they are very much interrelated, and we cannot talk about sequestration without nitrogen management. Well, IPCC, and then you have Pete Smith there with us today. He's one of the authors of this report, and clearly they mentioned that soils can be one of the solutions. It's not the only solution. We can contribute, but there are many other things that our societies need to do in order to address the mitigation of climate change. So from soils, we can contribute, but there are some challenges and uncertainties that people are, and decision makers are questioning about. One of them is the uncertainty about additionality and permanence. So if we capture, then we sequester, but will that carbon remains or not in time? That's one big question, and that's something that sometimes is being a block in some projects that we are trying to implement. But also it's very important to understand that we need to measure, and that brings a lot of sometimes concerns because people relate that measurement require a huge investment. So I will demonstrate you that this can be the case, but not always, because there are many alternatives, especially on what you want to do once you sequester carbon. We need to talk about all the greenhouse gases, because if we just relate to carbon, then we are making a mistake. We forget about nitrogen, methane, and that's very important, but we need to clearly mention that for making any change, we need someone to make it, and those are farmers, and sometimes they are not part of the equation. So our proposal is that we are not promoting only we are using the opportunity that the climate change agenda is giving us, okay? But our response is an integrated sustainable soil management, because once you start capturing and sequestering carbon, automatically you generate many ecosystem services. Therefore, we need to set this upfront, and we need to advocate for this approach. In our approach, we have 7 steps, okay, that start from the technical feasibility, because we need to know where we can do this. We need the agents of change, which are farmers. We need to agree with them to work, and of course, they need to adopt good practices, and for that, they need some technical support and incentives, because this requires some investment. Once the good practices are implemented, we need to measure, to report, verify, and also we need to monitor. And then we need to see what we want to do with this in terms of collecting the services that you are providing, and there we have some options. When talking about the feasibility, first we make a GSOC map, which is trying to depict what are, okay, the approximate current stocks, because, you know, we measure data for all the world at the same time so that we can talk about baselines. So far, we don't have it. But we have this map that shows us where do you have a lot of carbon, where you have less, and what we are missing is where is the potential. And currently, we are working on that with countries. So what we do is that we train country on agreed specifications that you can see, and then they are the ones who have to prepare their carbon sequestration potential map, following 3 scenarios: low, medium, high. And there we will understand what is the real potential to sequester carbon in agricultural soils. So that will guide us to have the focus where we can invest and where we can really make changes, okay? Then we need to find, of course, in those areas, farmers or farming associations that are willing to innovation, willing to make changes in terms on how to manage soils for their benefit, because for us, that's the key. Only farmers will adopt this if they see benefits for them, because although they understand climate change and so, they need to think about their families and their pockets. Once they accept to join this, they have access to all the technical tools that we provide them. And for adopting the good practices, we have a manual of good practices that is depicting all successful practices with scientific evidence on the ground that can help you to sequester carbon and to bring and enhance new or the ecosystem services they are providing. We have different tools also to support them, like the soil doctors, which is a sort of extension tool for farmers. This is farmer-to-farmer training, but all this is under the framework of the voluntary guidelines for sustainable soil management. So in this manual, basically, what we have we are trying to show based on meta-analysis of various scientific studies, where we have those hotspots of soil organic carbon, the practice associated with them in known landscapes, and they are presented in fact sheets, very simple fact sheets showing you what you need to do, what are the conditions in terms of the environment, and also what you require for making the change. And then you will have information about what you can expect, okay? So this manual has been produced by more than 370 scientists around the world, because we have practices from all the world. But again, we are not forgetting this issue, which is the nitrogen, especially because we are talking about agricultural soils. We cannot separate carbon and nitrogen, especially nitrous oxide, because that's part of the agriculture. And sometimes nitrous oxide is, well, not sometimes, it is demonstrated already that it is more dangerous than CO2. While we can sequester carbon, with nitrogen is an issue, and we can have negative impacts, not only on the atmosphere and the ozone layer, but with the eutrophication, but also farmers do not want to keep buying fertilizers and sometimes do not get results. We need to help them. So that's why this is part of our equation. For measuring, monitoring, reporting, and verification, we have this MRV protocol that gives you two options. One, where you want to have, let's say, a soft approach in which you have alternative methods so that you don't have to spend much. But if you want to generate carbon credits, then you need to follow the second, let's say, the other alternative that is as robust measurement of carbon in a cycle of 8 years. Our initiative works for a cycle of 8 years, and the measurements are first the baseline, okay, before adoption, of course, of the practices. Then the second measurement comes after 4 years, and then the final measurement at 8 years. And then we follow the procedure that the international institutions does in terms of verifying with external auditors, etc. All the data that is generated goes into a monitoring system that will be open. But in addition, we also have another protocol that measures the other ecosystem services that are generated in terms of productivity, in terms of physical properties related to water, especially, and biological activity. Also, we have a module for soil pollution, but we understand that that's more challenging and many do not want to really do it. Once we generate results, we have a marketplace, and here we have two paths. The green path is where our goal is the compliance with the voluntary guidance for sustainable soil management, the enhancement of ecosystem services, carbon sequestration, avoiding CO2 and N2O emissions, and of enhancing resilience of soils. So in the green path, we don't produce carbon credits, okay? And we use the Sustainable Soil Management Protocol. That's obligatory because we are very interested on the provision of ecosystem services. And if someone wants to also look in detail to the carbon, then they need to use the MRV protocol. In the carbon market path, we have carbon, our main goal is to produce carbon credits. That's what we really aim into. And that's mainly the interest of private sector who are trying to offset emissions. The provision of an enhancement of ecosystem services is just a byproduct. And for this, it is compulsory to use the MRV protocol because that's where we will be able to have a robust measurement of additionality and perseverance. And while the protocol for sustainable soil management is complementary. Some important messages. Well, as I said, climate change is an opportunity for the soil science community for scaling up sustainable soil management. That should be our goal. And while the center is soil organic carbon, we need to really move into soil health because that's what we want to ensure multiple benefits for all. And something very important, currently there are many initiatives trying to have soil organic carbon sequestration. We call it a race because there's amazing how many initiatives are now. But what we need to do is to try to have, let's say, some ethics and balance because while the private sector is trying to offset emissions, we have seen that as there is no regulatory, let's say, regulatory frameworks from the convention to set the cost and prices of carbon credits, we are seeing that many people want very cheap carbon credits. And that's something that we should avoid because sequestering carbon and provisioning ecosystem services is not an easy task. So we need to really give the real value to this. MRV, in our case, its use is flexible and depends on your objectives and uses. And again, I need to reiterate that farmers are the only ones who can make a difference. So we need to support them and they should be part of all this from the beginning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ronald. Very interesting themes. We would like to know more about your soil doctor and REC soil. I will ask my colleagues here to get in touch with you and see if we could work together and collaborate with you and with FAO at a bigger plane. Okay, so now we move on to our final speaker, Professor Peter Smith.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen. Thank you. So I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about organic carbon sequestration. So I'm going to talk about organic rather than inorganic, but I recognize the importance of inorganic carbon in the carbon cycle, as Yakov very eloquently outlined. But today I'm going to talk about the organic carbon because it's about recarbonization of soil. I recognize that inorganic carbon is a significant loss, but as Yakov said, we can't easily put it back. So I'm going to talk about the carbon that we can control, and that's the organic carbon. So is it feasible and can we scale it up? So the potential is feasible and the potential is large. So there have been a few estimates. Ratan showed some in his excellent keynote address, but we think that there's technical potential of something like 1.3 gigatons of carbon per year. So gigatons is thousands of millions of tons. So this is a big number. We have around about 1.3 gigatons per year. It could be even higher. Some estimates that include more soils, including peat soils. And Ratan mentioned one in 2018, which came up with a larger potential, about 3 times larger potential. But this is around about the potential that we have. We also have to consider that not all of that technical potential can be realized. So it has to be economically accessible. Some particular practices and some particular types of land are too expensive to restore easily. It would cost over $100 per ton of CO2 to restore them. So when we take into account the economics of restoring those soils and restoring the soil carbon, we get a potential of around about 0.4 to 0.7 gigatons of CO2 carbon equivalents per year, which is not insignificant. If you think that fossil fuel emissions are around about 10 tons, this is approaching somewhere around 7 to 10% of those emissions. So you can see from the graph that I put up here, this was from Keith Halcyon et al.'s paper in 2016, which was published in Nature. We have some actions which can be taken, which have a very high carbon sequestration potential per hectare. So if we look at histosols or peatlands, the very organic soils over here on the right, they occupy quite a small area, so they're low on the graph, but they have a very large potential. Others have a lower potential, for example, grazing land management and cropland management, but there are very large areas of them. So we can either restore large areas with a relatively small mitigation potential, or there are some areas with a very large mitigation potential, but only cover small areas. But if we add these all together, we come up with these very large, significant global numbers that we can restore and to increase the soil carbon sequestration. Additional soil carbon storage is available through the natural pathways to climate mitigation. So this was a study that was published earlier this year by Deborah Bossio and colleagues in Nature Sustainability, which looked at what component of these nature-based solutions is attributable to the soils. And Bossio et al. Find that quite a significant proportion is actually due to the soil carbon sequestration, not just the above ground carbon sequestration. So again, these numbers, when we add them up, come to quite a significant technical potential, something round about 3 to 5 gigatons per year. But it's not only important to consider soil carbon sequestration for climate benefits. There are many, many reasons, as Ratan outlined, for sequestering carbon. Increasing the organic matter content in the soil improves the water holding capacity, the workability, it can increase yields, and we can look at a range of co-benefits on ecosystem services and the Sustainable Development Goals. So here is an example where we took soil carbon sequestration as an example, and from that we can identify at least 7 functions provided by soil carbon sequestration. So it can produce underpin biomass production, it can store and filter nutrients and substances, it's important for biodiversity, it provides a physical and cultural environment, it's a source of raw material, it acts as a carbon pool, and it's an archive of geological and archaeological heritage. So there are a number of functions provided by the soils, ranging from biophysical through to cultural services, which are provided by the soils. And we can relate those functions to nature's contributions to people, or ecosystem services. So these ecosystem services are characterized under 18 nature's contributions to people, and we can map these functions onto those that support the different ecosystem services. So you can see that this one here, this is habitat creation and maintenance, is supported by soil functions 2 and 3. And going around, we can find that a number of these ecosystem services are supported by the soil functions provided by soil carbon sequestration. Having identified the ecosystem services that are supported by the different functions, we can go one step further and we can say, how do these ecosystem services contribute to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? And you can see that these ecosystem services, shown in these dark coloured circles in the outside segment of the pizza, underpin a number of the Sustainable Development Goals. So we can show quite clearly, using this conceptual framework, that through the functions provided and through the ecosystem services that those functions provide, and through the ecosystem services contributions to the Sustainable Development Goals, that soils do indeed contribute greatly to the delivery of a number of the Sustainable Development Goals, showing us that soil carbon sequestration is crucial for delivering on our wider sustainability and development pathways, not just for the climate and not just for food security. But we often talk about soil carbon sequestration like it is, like everything is easy, but we have to remember that there are some limitations, and it's important for us to recognize those. When we looked at this in relation to other climate mitigation options, there are some issues with saturation, permanence, leakage, and verification. I'll just go through each of those just with one slide for each of those, just so that we're aware of potential limitations for soil carbon sequestration. The first is that soil carbon saturates. So if we take soil carbon that is quite low, as shown over on this side of the graph, and we implement a management change that increases the soil organic carbon, it will eventually reach a new equilibrium level. And I think Ratan showed this in one of his slides, that there's a limited amount that we can increase that. It doesn't just increase forever. And if we sort of like look at how that plays out, when we implement a management change in the first few years, the first 5 years, say, we get a very, very large increase in soil carbon. For the next 5 years, that change is smaller. And for the next 5 years, that change is smaller. Until after about 20 to 50 or maybe even 100 years in some cold climates, we reach a new equilibrium, after which we get no net removal of carbon from the atmosphere. So another way of saying that is that the sink strength, the sink is the amount of carbon that's removed every year from the atmosphere, it declines as the soil approaches a new equilibrium. So we have to remember that it's an option that is time limited in its application. Having said that, it's really important if we aim to meet net zero targets by 2050. This is the sort of timescale over which soil carbon can play a really important role to help us remove carbon from the atmosphere whilst we're decarbonising the energy and transport sectors. So that's the important thing that we can use it for there. The other issue is that of permanence. So as with any other biological store of carbon, it can be reversed. We have to remember that when we improve the soil management, we can just as easily, when we stop doing that improved management of the soil, we can just as easily and quickly lose that soil carbon from the ecosystems. This can either be through a change in management, something deliberate that happens, or it could be related to climate risks and climate impacts in the future. So there's an issue of permanence associated with soil carbon that we also need to remember. It doesn't prevent us from doing it, but we have to remember it. It's a limitation to this particular method of dealing with the climate change crisis. And the other issue is to do with leakage and displacement. So if we have a farm that has manure and mineral fertilizer added, if we replace some of that mineral fertilizer with more manure, that increases the amount of soil carbon on the field where you apply the manure. But if you're just removing it from another field, the net result over the whole of the cropland area is zero. So we have to be careful about accounting for our soil carbon sequestration in a way that reflects a real removal from the atmosphere. Now, having said all that, I just put these up as a sort of a way to remind us that no option is perfect. No, there is no silver bullet to the climate change crisis, but soil carbon sequestration has a vital role to play, but we have to remember the limitations. The other important thing that I think we need to, I'll just finish with this, that we need to remember is that we need suitable monitoring, reporting and verification. So a number of the speakers so far, Ratan and particularly Ronald, who's just spoken about the FAO program, talk about the importance of monitoring and reporting and verification. That's because soil carbon is a very big pool of carbon. And when we change it, we make small changes against a very large background of soil carbon. So that makes it difficult to measure and to show a change. It changes slowly as well, so it's difficult to show a change over time. So we need to bring to bear our best available technology to solve that problem. So we published a paper earlier this year in Global Change Biology, which just put together some of the existing science, existing data sets, and existing knowledge that we have to try to verify soil carbon. I'm not going to spend a long time talking about it, but around the world, we have a number of long-term experiments which can act as benchmark sites where we implement a change in management, we can measure that soil carbon change, and we have long-term measurements of real change over decades. Nested within them, we have some shorter-term experiments rather, which measure fluxes, especially of things like CO2 and methane. Both of these sites can give us important long-term sites and short-term sites, give us important measurements, but also provide us with details that we can use to calibrate our soil organic carbon or greenhouse gas models, which we run on computers. So we can use these models directly, or we can develop tier 2 emission factors, which we can then use in inventories. Added to this, we also have very good spatial data. The FAO is providing excellent spatial data on soil cover. We also have land cover data and climate data, which we can use to drive the models. We have activity data that's collected by the FAO in FAO Stat, and with more granularity, more resolution at the local level within countries about the management information that goes on in the soils. And some countries also have a spatial resampling survey, which happens every few years, maybe 10 or 20 years, where on a national grid, they survey the soils and they can detect long-term change. So all of this information together can be used to help verify the soil carbon change over time. Last but not least, we have remote sensing, which can verify activity data and can provide inputs to run the models. So with a combination of very, very high tech and relatively low tech experiments and science, we can bring to bear and we can build a system that we can use to confidently verify and monitor soil organic carbon. So thank you for your attention. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Professor Peter Smith. Very thought-provoking discussion and presentations. There was a question actually for Professor Ratan Lal, which I missed out, but the panel may help us. Someone has asked about hydroponics and aeroponics, which have no organic base. So are there any comments on hydroponics and aeroponics? Yeah, please.
Yeah, these are feasible ways to grow food. Can you mute, please? Thank you.
Yeah.
They're feasible ways to produce food, but we can't really produce food on a mass basis with hydroponics. We need to cover very, very large areas of the planet with hydroponics to grow enough food to feed us. So I think for the foreseeable future, we're going to have to rely on soils. And in order to rely on those soils to produce the food we need to treat the soils really well. Not just treat them as a substrate in which we grow our food, but as an environment in which the biology and the chemistry provides the environment to grow our food.
Okay, there is another question. Please comment on the use of Ignite as organic carbon source for poor carbon soils. Any of the panelists? Use of Ignite as source of carbon. Or lignites, sorry, not Ignite, lignites. Any comments?
Well, we know that lignite is a form of carbon that is in quite long-term storage. So it's already, for carbon sequestration purposes, leaving the lignite where it is, it's already storing carbon, sequestering carbon. So whilst it may have some limited role in adding to soils, I think that there are other better sources that we can use first. For example, composts, municipal composts, manures, and organic residues.
Okay, I think we had a wonderful session. Once again, I'll go back to Madam Nopi Mami to close the session. Your comments, closing comments, ma'am. You have to unmute yourself.
Again, please.
Yeah. Yes, now.
Can you ask the question again, please?
Close the session with your concluding remarks. Your concluding remarks, please.
I think that the meeting today is very nice because we have here a lot of experience from the very great speaker, either the inorganic carbon and the organic carbon. that is very informative presentation, especially on the inorganic carbon. We just like learning a lot from the mechanism. So very pleased for that. And I think that this is the balance between the organic carbon and the inorganic carbon, because we need to make the balance between, because sometimes when you want to save the carbon, but you also like produce another thing. So we need to make a compensate between the practice and the real life. So I think the experience that we learned today is very good, and that I think if we work together, it could help. And also, I think that the work for the monitoring report and also the verification is very interesting, because you can have a long run of the experiment, and you can test for several type of the land use and also the management that will provide you a very good data that you can make a very good suggestion to the world, I think, for the sustainable management. So I thank you very much for all the speakers that provide a very good informative presentation on this.
Thank you everybody. We are grateful. You gave your time and effort and shared it with us. And this was assisted by Dr. Ansar Farooq, who is working for FFC, and I would like to acknowledge his help. And thank you all.